Chapter 11, The Escape. Don't call, give it up till I'm dead. One of my only not perfect habits. Lower decky. After storming out of Animus, I headed straight to the Commons building. I shoved the door open and it swung wide on its hinges, creaking loudly. The room was full of students turned to stare, but I didn't care. I marched over to a couch, plopped down, and made myself comfortable. Moments later, the counselor who had followed me into the building entered. Looking tense, good, you're here, I said. Tell Grant Price himself that I'm staying on this fucking couch and he can bring me my food when it's time for meals. The four counselors exchanged nervous glances, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. Finally, the young woman who had sprayed me in Animus, "Come on, Connor, if you refuse to go, we'll have to send you to PRT," she said. I laughed in disbelief. PRT? How the are you going to send me to PRT? Her face went pale. She turned again to her colleagues, silently pleading for backup. "And don't even think about touching me," I shouted, spitting the words. The counselors backed up, retreating a few feet before huddling together to discuss their next move. Casting frustrated looks my way, after a brief conversation, they turned and left the room. Feeling triumphant, I called out, "Fuck Carlbrook, fuck the staff, I'm staying right here. If anyone wants to join me, you're welcome." I made eye contact with a couple of kids who seemed cool with me. To my surprise, they joined in, and that's how the Carlbrook rebellion started. For days I held my ground. Anytime a staff member approached, they were met with an aggressive, obscene response. "Fuck you, motherfucker. You're my bitch. Bring me food." Yo, I was such a savage, bro. At first, my supporters stood along strong and proudly, joining the sit-in. But after a while, the constant pressure from the staff wore them down. Fear of not getting out began to creep in, and one by one they left. Initially, I was the center of attention in the Commons, but as time passed, my presence just became another part of the routine. The room moved on without me, and I sat there, feeling betrayed but not surprised. This was Carlbrook. It was what always happened. Alone in my rebellion, I decided to do something productive. I tore a page out of my journal and began writing down every abusive, unfair, or unlawful thing that I had previously experienced or heard about at Carlbrook. Once I finished, I folded the page and tucked it safely into my pocket. Weeks into my sit-in, I was abruptly woken in the middle of the night. Two enormous hands grabbed my wrists, and before I could process what was happening, I felt zip ties begin to clap around my hands. "What the?" I muttered groggily, and the same was done to my ankles. Suddenly I snapped awake in panic, wiggling off the couch and crashing on the floor. Standing over me was a huge redneck-looking guy, and next to him a massive black man with the biggest hands I had ever seen. "You can untie me right now," I yelled, kicking wildly, but bound by the wrists and ankles, I was helpless. They grabbed me, lifted me to my feet. The black man spoke in a deep voice. "Walk." I let my body go limp, collapsing back onto the floor. These two men exchanged a glance and then grabbed me again, one by my feet and the other by my shoulders. Oh my God. And carried me out of the Commons and into my humid Virginia night. They walked me around the lake, heading towards the woodline, where I spotted a small tin portable building with a low-hanging roof. They opened the door, revealing a dingy, musty interior. Inside were a few rusty metal chairs, a cot, and some old generic inspirational posters that look as though they're from 1950. They sat me down on one of the chairs. "Don't move," the lumberjack guy looking growled at me, cut the zip ties off my wrists and ankles with a pocket knife. I rubbed my wrist, trying to get the blood flowing again. Now that I was free from my restraints, my mind raced. What should I do? I thought about running, but where would I go? Even if I managed to escape, I'm stranded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles and miles of woods and old churches. Feeling defeated, I sat there, staring at the stained carpet, the chirping of crickets outside, the only sound. I spent days like that in the portable. One of the guards sat with me at all times, while the other blocked the door. They brought me food at meal times, and I slept on a stiff, uncomfortable cot. My days were spent either writing or staring blankly at the floor. Occasionally I had asked to call my parents or go to the dorms to shower, but black guard inside always shook his head no. It was a strange, lonely existence, waiting for something to change, knowing that I was trapped. At the end, that was probably nothing compared to what solitary confinement in jail is like, oh my God. At the end of the week, the door creaked open and my counselor strolled in, pushing a pair of oh my God, dude, wow. I just got hit with that, dude. Yeah, solitary is fucked, bro. Especially when you're withdrawing. Oh my God, bro, that was so fucked up. I can't imagine people who do that for years. At the end of the week, the doors creaked open and my counselor strolled in, pushing a pair of sunglasses up onto his forehead. "Connor, you've had a week to reflect in here. he said as he approached me. You have two options. You can either start complying or go spend a long time at a wilderness program. I adjusted myself in the rusty chair, making sure the creak was loud enough to emphasize my defiance. I locked eyes with him, cocked my head slightly, and said, "Go to hell." He squinted at me, biting his lip in frustration. "All right, Connor, we'll have a discussion with your parents about sending you as soon as possible." With that, he turned and he left. Afterward, a stream of counselors and assistant counselors came in, one after the other, trying to break my resolve. They tried to persuade, threaten, cajole me, but I stayed immovable. My strategy was simple: stall them until I could find a way out. Then it hit me. The Baker Act. I'd heard about it during my time in other facilities in Florida. It was this law that required the institutionalization of anybody who posed a threat to themselves or others due to a mental illness. I knew Virginia laws were probably different, but I was sure that there had to be something similar. If I could convince them I was suicidal, they would have no choice but to remove me. The next time the counselor came in, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "I want to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself." They looked at each other skeptical. I could see it in their eyes. This fiery kid who just told his counselor to go to hell suddenly wants to kill himself. They didn't buy it. They whispered amongst themselves and walked out, but I didn't stop. Every counselor that came in, I repeated the same line: "I want to kill myself," over and over and over again. I started to feel like I was a tape on repeat, but I was determined. Eventually, a young counselor, someone who I'd actually gotten along with very much during my stay. Yo, shouts out to that guy, bro. He's a real one. "Hey, Connor, I want to kill myself," I interrupted, not giving him a chance to even start the usual wilderness program threat. His expression shifted, becoming more serious, almost sympathetic. He looked at me the way that someone looks at a wounded animal, with a mixture of compassion and fear. "Do you really?" he asked softly. "Yes, I want to kill myself." "Okay," he replied, standing up to leave. He didn't argue or push back. A while later, he returned with my main counselor. They stood over me almost like they were giving me one final chance to back down. "I'm going to kill myself," I screamed, louder than before. The words ripped my throat raw, and the dry cough followed, eating from deep within my chest. They exchanged a glance, stepped outside to talk, and I could barely make out their voices through the thin metal walls of the portable. "See," said the counselor. "He doesn't mean it," he said, bluffing. "He's bluffing. They always bluff." "Look," the nice counselor's voice grew more forceful, "we have to notify the authorities. It's the law. You might not care, but I'm not getting in trouble for this. What if he's serious?" There was a pause, a moment of silence between them. "Do what you want," my main counselor finally said with a dismissive voice. I heard the crunch of leaves as they walked away, fading into the distance, and I smiled to myself. It felt like I had just won a long, hard-fought war. Hours later, an ambulance arrived, and I was taken to do a TDO, a temporary detention order facility. After going through the regular works of being, this is so fucking cool. This is like from a movie, bro. God, I'm so grateful for God that I had to go through all this weird-ass shit. After going through the regular works of being freshly institutionalized, I was taken into a standard small hospital room and given a bed. When the door opened, I took a deep breath and shook off my performative desperation. A middle-aged woman with brown hair wearing blue scrubs stepped over by my bedside, flipped some papers up in front of her face, and cleared her throat and looked at me. "Okay, Connor, so it says here that, ma'am," I said, clearing my throat and digging the piece of journal paper out of my back pocket, "I do not want to kill myself. I am in the grips of an abusive boarding school and did all of this to talk to somebody on the outside." Wow, yeah, this is fucked. But they got shut down because of this. I extended my hand to her with a folded wad of paper. "Here's the write-up of everything illegal, abusive, or unjust that I've experienced or heard about." She looked back down at her paper, set them nearby the bedstand, and grabbed the paper from me. She unfolded it and she read, and her eyes grew wide and earnest. When she got to the bottom, she folded it back in half and looked me in the eyes. "If this is true, I'm so sorry," she said. She stood there quietly for a moment and took a deep breath and spoke. "Here's what I can do. I will make a report to the FBI and see if they will open up an investigation. For now, you'll have to go back to Carlbrook because you're clearly not suicidal, and unfortunately, that is the only reason you are being held here right now." She posted her hand on the rail of the bed and raised her eyebrows. "Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. "Thank you for everything." I felt a strange stir of emotions then. It was a proud jolt of victory and a small stab of anxiety. I had only just left that dreadful campus, while any time away was a great relief. Now I had to go back to the same terrible place I had just triggered an FBI investigation at. Images of terrible counselors, the goons, those are the people who kidnap you, the Carlbots, and the small portable berated my mind. Carlbrook was as bad before, but now I don't even know what to expect. Chapter 12. It's called The Return.